My family branded me a failure for dropping out of West Point. They gave the family farm to my brother. At his wedding, a four-star general saw me and said, "Major, what are you doing here?" My father dropped his champagne. The call came on a Tuesday, cutting through the sterile silence of my D.C. apartment like a rock through a plate glass window. The caller ID read Mom. And for a long moment, I just stared at it, a familiar cocktail of love and dread churning in my gut. On the triple monitor array in front of me, streams of encrypted data packet analysis froze. My world of silent, digital warfare paused for the one front I could never win. "Hey, Mom," I said, forcing a casualness into my voice that I hadn't felt in a decade. I clicked a mouse, and the complex charts vanished, replaced by a half-finished logo for a fictional coffee brand. My prop for these moments. "Caleb, honey, how are you?" Her voice was the same as ever, a warm, worn quilt of a voice, though frayed at the edges with a permanent thread of worry I knew I'd helped weave. "I'm good. Busy. You know how it is." The standard lie. Busy for her meant chasing down freelance design clients. Busy, for me, meant coordinating a multi-agency effort to patch a critical vulnerability in a key piece of national infrastructure. "I know, honey. It's just, Liam's wedding is in 3 weeks." She let the sentence hang in the air, a fragile bridge I was expected to cross. We'd all be so happy if you came home for it." Home. The word itself was a landmine. It wasn't the sprawling Virginia farmhouse I missed. It was the idea of it, a place that no longer existed for me. A place where I wasn't the family's greatest disappointment. I looked around my apartment. It was organized to the point of being impersonal. A black leather couch, a glass coffee table, and the powerful computing rig that was the heart of my real life. No family photos. No clutter. It was the living space of a man who could pack his life into a single duffel bag in under 5 minutes. Because he'd had to. "I'll try, Mom. It's just a tough time with projects." Another lie. My schedule was dictated by world events, not client deadlines. "Please, Caleb, it's a big day for your brother. For the family." The unspoken part was, don't embarrass us again. Don't make your absence the topic of conversation. Your father, he's working so hard. They both are. I knew what that meant. It meant my father, Sergeant Major Arthur Thorne, retired, was still breaking his 60-year-old back on the farm he loved more than anything. It meant my brother, Liam, was right there beside him, his own dreams of being an engineer long dead, buried under the weight of the responsibility I had supposedly shrugged off. My jaw tightened. "I'll be there," I said, the words tasting like surrender. "I'll clean my schedule." The relief in her voice was pathetic. "Oh, Caleb, that's wonderful. Just wonderful." We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation carefully navigating a minefield of topics. She asked no specific questions about my work, and I offered no specific answers. It was a dance we'd perfected over 10 years. After he hung up, I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the indifferent D.C. traffic. I had faced down threats that would have made my father's blood run cold. I had briefed generals and advised senators. But nothing felt as daunting as the thought of going home. The memory is burned into my mind with the clarity of a flashbang. I was 21, standing in the living room of the farmhouse, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and my father's disapproval. 10 years ago, but felt like yesterday. I had driven down from West Point for the weekend with a cold stone in my stomach. 2 men in crisp, anonymous suits had pulled me aside a week earlier, showing me a future I never knew existed, and handed me the lie that would define my life. "I'm not going back," I said. The words fell into the room and died on the braided rug. My mother, Helen, was frozen by the kitchen doorway, a dish towel clutched in her hand. Liam, just 19 and home from community college for the summer, was slumped in an armchair, his jaw going slack with disbelief. But my focus was on my father. He was in his workshop, a small room off the living area, cleaning his old Remington hunting rifle. It was a ritual, something he did when he needed to think. At my words, the rhythmic motion of the cleaning rod stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any gunshot. He placed the rod down with deliberate, unnerving calm, the sound of metal on wood echoing in the quiet house. Then he stepped into the living room, wiping his hands on an oily rag. His eyes, the same color as a stormy sky, pinned me to the spot. "Say that again." "I'm leaving the academy," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's not for me. It's not for you to know that I've been recruited into a program so secret its very existence is classified. It's not for you to know that my scores in strategic analysis and cryptology put me in the top 0.01% of all cadets. It's not for you to know that they need my mind more than they need my body in a uniform." I couldn't say any of it. My oath had already been sworn in a windowless room hundreds of miles away. My father's face was stone. "Thorn men do not quit. We don't run from challenge. We don't throw away the honor of a place like West Point." Liam shot out of his chair. "Are you kidding me? After everything? Dad pulled every string he had to get you that nomination. My engineering scholarship. I was going to take it, remember? But I deferred to stay here and help out, because you were going to be the big shot officer. You were the plan." His words hit me harder than my father's cold fury. Liam, who could build an engine from scrap parts, had a full-ride scholarship to Virginia Tech. He'd put it on hold, believing I was the family's future, and I was now pulling the rug out from under all of them. "I can't," was all I could manage, my throat tight. The lie was a physical thing, a gag in my mouth. My father took a step closer. He didn't shout. He never shouted. His quiet was far more terrifying. "You're a disappointment," he said, the words precise and deadly. "You have brought shame on this family and on that uniform. Get your things. I want you out of my house before dinner." He turned his back on me then, a dismissal more absolute than any argument, and walked back into his workshop. The sound of the cleaning rod resuming its work was the sound of my banishment. The command center was a cavern of cold air and low blue light. The only sound the quiet hum of servers and the frantic, hushed voices of the best minds in U.S. Cyber Command. For 72 hours, we'd been hunting ghosts. A state-sponsored group of hackers, known to us only as Talon, had found a zero-day exploit in the firmware of a major power grid controller. They weren't just rattling the cage. They were systematically unlocking it, preparing for a coordinated blackout across 3 states. They're spoofing maintenance protocols to mask their intrusion, a young lieutenant to my left muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Every time we patch a hole, they pivot. It's like they know what we're going to do before we do." I stared at the cascade of data on my central screen, my eyes tracing patterns the others couldn't see. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a feint. They were making noise in the high-traffic sectors to draw our attention, while the real attack was a slow, methodical infiltration through a forgotten, legacy diagnostic port. It was elegant. It was brilliant. And it was about to fail. "Forget the main servers," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "Focus on Subnet 7, that old hydro dam controller. They're not going through the front door. They're jimmying a basement window. Lieutenant, reroute all honeypot resources there. Feed them garbage data that looks like gold. I want to see exactly who they are and where they're reporting back to before we cut them off." The order was counterintuitive, a risk. But the team trusted me. For the next hour, a silent, furious battle of wits was waged in lines of code. We watched as Talon took the bait, their digital fingerprints smearing all over our trap. We identified their staging server, their command and control structure, and even the digital signature of their lead programmer. Then, with a single command from me, we slammed the door shut, patched the exploit, and burned their access to the ground. The threat was neutralized. The lights across the eastern seaboard would stay on. No one outside this room would ever know. A wave of profound exhaustion and satisfaction washed over me. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my burning eyes. My phone, on silent, lit up on the desk beside me. It was a text from Liam. My screen was still showing a map of the neutralized global cyber threat. His text was a picture of a splintered barn roof, a gaping hole showing the gray sky beyond. The accompanying message read, "Tornado came through last night. Guessing you didn't feel it in the city. Dad's out there now, trying to tarp it in the rain. Must be nice not having to worry about things that are real." The emotional whiplash was staggering. One moment, I was Major Caleb Thorne, Strategic Commander. The next, I was just Caleb, the useless, absentee son. The message wasn't just an update. It was an indictment. It was a reminder of the role I was forced to play in their lives. I opened my banking app. My last hazard pay supplement for a deployment in the Horn of Africa was sitting in my account. I transferred a significant chunk of it, more than enough to fix a dozen roofs, to my brother's account. The transfer was instant and anonymous. I texted back, just landed a big European client. A real windfall. Use this for the roof. And hire a pro to do it. Don't let dad climb up there. Liam's reply came a few minutes later. Wow. Okay. Thanks. Guess even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. I closed my eyes. The squirrel had just stopped a foreign power from crippling the country. But all that mattered was the nut. All that would ever matter was the nut. The local country club was the fanciest place our town had to offer, a world of manicured lawns and hushed conversations that felt as foreign to me as the dark side of the moon. I stood near the bar at the rehearsal dinner, nursing a club soda, a ghost at my own family's feast. I wore a blazer and slacks, an outfit that felt like a costume. Around me, the Thorne clan and the family of the bride, Chloe, mingled. I was an island. Liam was glowing, a wide, genuine smile plastered on his face as he held Chloe's hand. He looked happy, and a part of me, the brother part that hadn't been cauterized by years of resentment, was happy for him. But I could feel the space around me, the invisible bubble of my failure. Relatives would offer me tight, pitying smiles. My mother would dart anxious glances my way, as if expecting me to spontaneously combust and ruin everything. And my father, he hadn't looked me in the eye since I'd arrived. He was holding court near the fireplace, regaling Chloe's father with stories of his time in the 101st Airborne. He was in his element, a patriarch, a warrior. The dinner was served. The wine flowed. I sat at a table with a great-aunt who wanted to know if my graphic designing paid the bills, and a cousin who loudly detailed his recent promotion at a regional bank. I just nodded and pushed food around my plate. Then came the toasts. Several people spoke. Finally, my father stood, tapping his glass for attention. A hush fell over the room. He was a man who commanded respect, even in a golf shirt. I want to say a few words about my son, Liam. He began, his voice resonant with pride. He looked directly at Liam, his eyes shining. A man's worth isn't measured by what he says. It's measured by what he does. It's measured by his sacrifice, by his commitment to the people and the land that he is responsible for. My stomach went cold. I knew where this was going. When this family faced a crisis, he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, but pointedly skipping over me. When we needed a steady hand, Liam stepped up. He put his own dreams on hold. He chose duty. He chose family. He chose to stay and fight for the legacy that my father built and his father before him. He saved this family, plain and simple. He paused, letting the words sink in. That's what a real man does. He doesn't run when things get hard. He plants his feet. He raises glass. To Liam, the son a father can be truly, completely proud of. The room erupted in applause. To Liam, people cheered. I raised my glass, my hand trembling slightly, the ice in my drink rattling like a death knell. The toast was a masterpiece of public humiliation, a perfectly aimed shot that praised one son by damning the other in front of 50 people. As the applause died down, my father walked over to Liam, who was blinking back tears of pride. My mother stood beside them, beaming. Then Arthur did something that made the air leave my lungs. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn, velvet-covered box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on faded satin, was an old Omega watch, its steel case gleaming. This was my father's, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. He gave it to me when I shipped out for basic. It was meant for my firstborn son to be passed down, but it belongs to the man who carries the legacy. It belongs to you, Liam. He took the watch and fastened it onto my brother's wrist. It was a coronation, a transfer of power, a public and final declaration that I, Caleb Thorne, was no longer in the line of succession. I was disinherited, not of money, but of history, of belonging. In that moment of crushing silence, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Not a normal vibration, but a specific, pulsing pattern I knew well. I pulled it out under the table. The screen was black, save for 2 words in stark, red letters. Aegis compromised. Protocol 7. Now, Aegis was our most sensitive network of overseas assets. Protocol 7 was the highest alert. It meant agents were in immediate danger. It meant I had to move right now. No delays. No excuses. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Every eye turned to me. I walked to the head table. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. "I have to go. A work emergency." Liam's happy face crumbled into familiar disgust. "An emergency? Now? Are you serious, Caleb?" My father just stared at me, his expression one of utter contempt. "Of course," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Always an emergency. Get out of here. You've done enough." I didn't go back to D.C. I couldn't. After driving aimlessly for an hour, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white, I found myself parked on a dirt track overlooking the Thorne property. The rehearsal dinner was over. The lights at the country club were out, but a warm glow still emanated from the farmhouse, a beacon of a life I wasn't part of. I got out of the car and started walking. The night was cool, the air filled with the scent of cut hay and damp earth. It was the smell of my childhood. I walked the perimeter of the property, my feet finding the familiar paths in the dark. I passed the old oak tree where Liam and I had carved our initials, now faded and barely visible. I saw the dilapidated fence I was supposed to have helped him fix 3 summers ago. I saw the new patch on the barn roof, a dark, clean square against the weathered shingles, a patch my money had paid for. The pain of my father's words, of the watch ceremony, was a physical ache in my chest. He hadn't just praised my brother. He had erased me. In his story, the family had only one son, the responsible one, the one who stayed. And as I stood there in the darkness, a different feeling began to curdle in my gut, mixing with the hurt. It was something ugly, something I was ashamed of, but it was there all the same, a flash of hot, bitter pride. They have no idea. The thoughts slither into my mind, a venomous serpent. They stand in their little hall and toast the man who can fix a tractor. They celebrate the man who can patch a roof. They have no earthly concept of what I do. I looked at the farmhouse, at its flickering lights, at the boundaries of its few hundred acres. My world doesn't have fences, I thought, a wave of cold arrogance washing over me. My battlefield is the entire globe. While they worry about a mortgage, I shift assets that could fund a small country. While they toast with cheap champagne, I make decisions that alter the course of geopolitics. One command from my keyboard, one single line of code, holds more weight and power than every deed, every title, every handful of dirt on this entire farm. The thought was intoxicating and repulsive. It was the defense mechanism of a man pushed too far, a way to build a wall around the part of me that was screaming in agony. I was the secret king, the invisible god, and they were just mortals, bless their simple, hard-working hearts. I hated myself for thinking it. This secret, this power, it hadn't just isolated me. It was corroding me. It was turning my pain into a superiority complex. My father had called me a disappointment. In that dark moment, I had become something worse, a man who secretly agreed with him, but for entirely different, more damning reasons. He thought I was nothing. The dark voice in my head whispered that they were the ones who were nothing. I sank to the ground, the wet grass soaking through my pants, and put my head in my hands. The emergency I'd run to was real. I had spent the last 2 hours on a series of encrypted calls, rerouting assets, authorizing payments, and moving ghosts from one shadow to another. I had saved 3 lives tonight, and I had never felt more alone. I almost didn't go. I sat in my motel room the next day, staring at the cheap suit I'd bought, convinced that showing up would only pour salt in a wound that was already septic. But my mother's pleading voice on the phone, the thought of the one thread connecting me to them snapping for good, was enough to get me into my car. The wedding was held in a clearing in the woods behind the main farmhouse. It was beautiful, rustic, and everything Liam and Chloe had wanted. I slipped in late, taking a spot at the very back of the assembled guests, partially obscured by a large maple tree. I was a ghost again, a silent observer. The ceremony was lovely. Liam looked impossibly handsome, Chloe radiant. When they said their vows, a genuine pang of happiness shot through my cynicism. I watched my parents in the front row. My mother wept openly, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father stood ramrod straight, his face a mask of solemn pride. On Liam's wrist, the Omega watch caught the afternoon sun. The reception was held in a large, open-sided tent nearby. Music played. People laughed. I found a corner near the edge of the tent, planning to stay for a socially acceptable 30 minutes, give a gift, and vanish. That's when I saw him. He was standing near Chloe's parents, a tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, with the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. His hair was silver, his posture erect. My blood ran cold. It was General Markin, a 4-star legend in the intelligence community. The man who had personally decorated me in a classified ceremony just 6 months prior. And, as I vaguely recall from a briefing file, Chloe's uncle. The one piece of intelligence I had failed to properly consider. I tried to turn, to blend into the shadows, to simply walk away. But it was too late. He had scanned the crowd, and his eyes, trained to pick out a single, anomalous detail in a sea of chaos, landed on me. I saw the flicker of recognition, the slight furrow of his brow, the cognitive dissonance of seeing one of his top field-grade officers trying to look invisible at a country wedding in rural Virginia. He excused himself from Chloe's parents and began walking towards me. Every step he took was a drumbeat of doom. There was nowhere to run. I straightened up, my posture shifting instinctively from civilian slouch to military bearing. "I thought that was you," General Markin said, his voice a low, commanding baritone that still managed to cut through the music. He extended his hand. "Didn't expect to see you here." "General," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "Sir, my brother is the groom." "Ah, of course. Small world." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "Well, this is certainly a more pleasant setting than our last meeting." Right on cue, my father, making his rounds, approached with Chloe's father. "Arthur," Chloe's father said, "I'd like you to meet my brother-in-law, General Markin." My father's chest puffed out. "A genuine honor, General. Arthur Thorne, Sergeant Major, retired." "A Sergeant Major," Markin said with deep respect. "The backbone of the Army." "A pleasure, Sergeant Major." He then gestured towards me. "You must be immensely proud of your son here. He's one of ours, one of the best." My father froze. His polite smile faltered. I'm sorry, General. You must be mistaken. My son, the groom, is Liam. This is my other son, Caleb. He works for himself. A graphic designer." General Markin let out a short, sharp laugh. "Graphic designer? Is that what he's calling it these days? That's good cover." "No, Sergeant Major. Your son, Caleb, is one of the sharpest strategic minds I've ever had the privilege of serving with." A deathly silence fell over our small group. My mother and Liam, drawn by the conversation, had just walked over. "What are you talking about?" Liam asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. The general, finally sensing the profound, catastrophic disconnect, looked from my father's bewildered face to my own grim expression. He was a master of reading situations. He understood instantly. "Oh, I see," he said quietly. He turned back to my father. "Sergeant Major, your son operates in a world where recognition is a liability. But I'm telling you, as his commanding officer, the work he did on Operation Nightshade, it didn't just succeed. It saved the entire battalion my own son was assigned to. He is a hero. Period." Liam stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. My mother's hand flew to her lips, her eyes wide with shock. My father looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. He stared at me, his mind furiously trying to reconcile the image of the West Point dropout, the aimless freelancer, the family disgrace, with the words of a 4-star general. And in that moment of stunned silence, Liam's champagne glass, held loosely in his hand, slipped from his fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the thick grass with a dull, muffled thud, a sound that somehow sealed the unreality of the moment. The truth was out. The world seemed to warp around us. The music and laughter from the reception faded into a dull roar, the scene taking on the surreal quality of a dream. General Markin, realizing he had just detonated a personal bomb, gave me a curt, respectful nod. "Major Thorne," he said, his voice low and deliberate, cementing my rank in the air between us. "We'll speak later." He then tactfully extracted himself, leaving my family and me in the wreckage. My father found his voice first. It was a strangled, disbelieving whisper. "Major, we need to go somewhere else," I said, my voice flat. "Not here." I led the way, a grim procession of four, away from the tent and into the quiet of the farmhouse. We walked into the living room, the same room where my banishment had begun 10 years earlier. The air crackled with unspoken questions. Liam was the first to break. "What the hell is going on, Caleb?" "Major? Operation Nightshade? What was all that?" My mother sank onto the couch, looking pale and unsteady. "Caleb, that man, that general, is it true?" I looked at their faces, confused, betrayed, shocked. The carefully constructed lie I had maintained for a third of my life had been demolished in 30 seconds. There was no point in trying to piece it back together. "Yes," I said, "it's all true. But, West Point," my father stammered. "You dropped out. You work in design." The dropout story was my cover, I explained, the words feeling alien after a decade of silence. I was recruited out of the academy my third year, straight into a classified intelligence program. It's housed under Army Cyber Command. My work is sensitive. Liam took a step forward, his eyes wild with a dawning, horrified understanding. He started connecting dots, the random, inexplicable events of my life suddenly snapping into a coherent, terrifying picture. Those times you disappeared for weeks? The camping trips with no cell service? Deployments, I confirmed. That gash on your arm, you said, was from a bike accident? Shrapnel from a car bomb in Mogadishu. And the money, he whispered, his face paling. The money you sent for the roof. The European client. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place for him. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of agony. "That was from Nightshade, wasn't it? The operation the general mentioned. The one that saved his son." I just nodded, too exhausted to speak. My father sank into his armchair, the one he always sat in. He looked smaller, older. "For 10 years, he said to the room, to himself. "For 10 years, we thought. You thought I was a failure." I finished for him, a bitter edge to my voice I couldn't suppress. "A coward. A disgrace. You thought I was anything but what I actually was, a soldier. Just like you." My mother started to cry, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. "But why, Caleb? Why wouldn't you tell us? We're your family." "That's exactly why I couldn't tell you," I snapped, my own control finally breaking. "It's called operational security. My life, the lives of my team, the lives of assets in the field depend on secrecy. Knowing my real job would have put you in danger. At the very least, it would have been a burden you were never meant to carry. The cover story wasn't my choice. It was a requirement of the job. A job I have done faithfully every single day for the last 10 years. The room fell silent, the weight of a decade of lies and misunderstandings pressing down on us, suffocating us. The happy music from the wedding reception drifted in through the open window, a mocking soundtrack to our family's implosion. The next morning, the four of us sat around the heavy oak kitchen table. The remnants of Liam's wedding celebration were all around us, stray ribbons, a half-empty bottle of champagne on the counter. But the atmosphere was that of a wake. My mother had made coffee and toast, moving around the kitchen with a fragile, automatic grace, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Liam stared into his coffee cup, as if it held the answers to the universe. He hadn't said more than 10 words since the confrontation. I felt a deep, aching pity for him. His wedding day, the happiest day of his life, had been hijacked by my secret. Finally, my father spoke. He didn't look at me, but at the grain of the wood on the table. He didn't offer an apology. I never expected one. Apologies weren't in his vocabulary. Instead, he asked a question, but it wasn't a father's question. It was a soldier's. What's your security clearance? TS/SCI, I replied quietly. With additional compartments, I can't specify. He nodded slowly, processing. He understood the language. Top secret/sensitive compartmented information. It was a world away from his own infantry experience, but he understood the gravity. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then he spoke again, his voice lower, rougher. I lost 3 men outside Kandahar, he said, still not looking up. Good men. A corporal and 2 privates. We were on a patrol. The intel brief said the sector was clear. A simple hearts and minds walk through. He paused, and I saw his hand clench into a fist on the table. It wasn't clear. They were waiting for us. An IED, followed by a coordinated ambush. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes met mine. For the first time, I didn't see a father looking at a disappointing son. I saw an old soldier looking at a younger one, sharing a truth that no civilian could ever understand. It was a catastrophic intelligence failure, he said, his voice raw. Someone up the chain, sitting in a comfortable room somewhere, didn't see the pattern. They looked at the data and told us it was safe. And for that mistake, 3 young men went home in boxes. He held my gaze. Your work, he said, and it was a statement, not a question. Your work with the patterns, the data, you do it so that other soldiers don't have to walk into an ambush like that. So they get to go home. It wasn't an absolution. It wasn't forgiveness for the decade of scorn he'd heaped on me. But it was something more valuable. It was understanding. It was a bridge built from the hard-won, bloody knowledge of his own past, reaching across the chasm to my present. Yes, sir, I said quietly. That's the job. He just nodded again, a final, sharp gesture of acknowledgement. A silent truce had been declared. The healing, if you could call it that, was slow and awkward. It wasn't a single, cathartic moment, but a series of small, clumsy steps in a new direction. I extended my leave, staying at the farm for a week, a thing I hadn't done since I was a teenager. It was strange. The old dynamics were gone, replaced by a hesitant, uncertain respect. My mother would just watch me sometimes, as if trying to see the major under the face of the son she thought she knew. My father started asking me questions, not about specific operations, he knew better, but about process, about the challenges of leadership, about the nature of the new kind of warfare I was fighting. We spoke a shared language of duty, and it was a start. The hardest part was Liam. He avoided me for 2 days, his shame and confusion a palpable wall between us. I found him on the 3rd day, down by the creek, skipping stones across the water, just like we used to when we were kids. I sat on the bank next to him. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he turned to me, his face etched with a pain that mirrored my own. All that time, he said, his voice barely a whisper. All those years I was bragging to you, telling you about fixing the irrigation pump or getting a good price for the soybeans. And you were, I don't know, stopping World War III or something. Did you laugh at me? Did you think I was just some dumb hick brother playing in the dirt? The genuine agony in his question broke my heart. It was the insecurity that had fueled his resentment all along. I looked him straight in the eye. Never, I said, my voice thick with an honesty I hadn't been able to show him in a decade. Not once. If anything, Liam, I was jealous of you. He looked stunned. Jealous? Of what? Of this. He gestured around at the fields, the mud on his boots. Yes, I said. Jealous that you got to be here. That you got to build things with your hands and watch them grow. Jealous that you could see the results of your work right in front of you. My work is abstract. It's zeros and ones and secrets. Half the time, the only way I know I've succeeded is by what doesn't happen. You're here, holding this family together. You're building something real. I was always proud of you for that. I still am. A single tear rolled down his cheek, and he quickly wiped it away. He picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. It bounced 7 times before sinking. The watch, he said quietly. Dad gave it to me. It should have been yours. No, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. He gave it to the right man. You stayed. You carried the legacy. It's yours. You earned it. He nodded, a fragile peace settling between us. We sat there for another hour, not saying much, just watching the creek flow. The chasm between us hadn't vanished, but for the first time, we had started to build a bridge. My life would always be one of secrets, but now, at least, my family knew I was a soldier. They knew I hadn't run from the fight. I had just been fighting a different kind of war on a battlefield they could never see, for all the same reasons that they woke up every morning to work the land. For family, for home, for a future that was safe. And for the first time, it felt like I might be able to have both.